Welcome to ND and Me, a podcast to share NDers' lived experiences. I'm Richard, an ND coach, mentor, accountability buddy, and business consultant. Matthew,
Yes.
who are you?
Okay, so I'm Matthew Macariou. I'm a 53-year-old guy. I'm married. I have two grown-up stepchildren. I'm working as a quality technician at Bentley Motors. I've been a chemist throughout my career, really. I worked for all sorts of places, and I'm sure we'll come back to that sort of CV during the course of it. But yeah, that's kind of me, where I am at the moment.
Cool. And then you run this podcast that links back to that.
Yeah. So I do a podcast as well. I have a podcast, Chemistry Made Simple. So that's a podcast where I'm trying to help school children who are doing chemistry, school children at A-level mostly, and similar levels throughout the world.
Fantastic. So talk to me about the process you went through to end up with a diagnosis, with understanding how you interact with the world with that.
Okay, so my diagnosis situation at the moment is self-diagnosis. Okay, I'm going to start talking about autism rather than ADHD, just because that's the history of how it worked for me. And I suppose looking back, I always knew I didn't quite fit in. I was quite different. I had a lot fewer close friends. I suppose a lot fewer friends, but they were close friends to me throughout my life, really, and thought differently to people and valued things differently to people. And then it came to 3 or 4 years ago, a family member was telling us about, she'd just had a diagnosis for autism. And while she was telling me and the rest of the family about how that came to be, how the conversation during the disco interview went, I was thinking, gosh, that describes me, and that describes me, and that describes me, and I need to look into this. And I took that away, and of course didn't particularly look into it that deeply at the time. I just thought, oh, that is something that's a possibility. And gradually, over a period of time, I kind of, as autism has been a bit more in the media, I've heard more and more things and decided to look into it more. And then there was certain programs on the TV. There was the McGuinness family program that I saw, and all these things were saying, yeah, you really need to look into this. This is describing not just, occasionally, but this is describing your life, really. So I did. I looked into it and looked into the screening questionnaires and they came back really strongly as indicating I was probably autistic. So I've spoken to the doctor since, gone through their screening, and I'm just in that long queue now waiting for a diagnosis. And then following on from that, whilst I was continuing to look into it, something came up with ADHD, because obviously there's a lot of crossover when you're researching things, and there were certain things in the descriptions of ADHD that I thought, well, actually that describes exactly certain bits of my life. The whole starting one task and moving on to another, and then another, and then another, and probably not finishing any of them, or maybe coming back and finishing them later. That is not, I'm sure most people do that sometimes, but for me, that's like my daily almost routine. Certainly at home anyway. And so I looked into that, and again, once I've looked into that a bit more, parallel to that, at work, I was, after the realization of autism, I was feeling for a little while, gosh, nothing's ever done for, everything's for neurotypical people, nothing's ever for neurodiverse people. And after a week or two of that, suddenly on our company intranet pops up some event that was being done by, we have various networks at work, but one's a health and wellbeing network that's got a neurodiverse work stream in it. And they were doing they were doing an event for the National Autistic Society's celebration of World Autism Day at the beginning of April. And I'm like, wow, I need to get in touch with this. I need to be part of this. I need to get in touch with other autistic and neurodiverse people who are in the same company as me and find out, what do I need to do to help myself at work? And things changed greatly there. I got in touch and they advised me, how to speak to the occupational health, get an interview with the occupational health therapist to see how they could look into what might help me, and gave me the confidence to speak to my manager about it. And it's just gone from strength. It's really helped me a great deal. And having seen that occupational health therapist, and she was really good. She spotted the ADHD thing and said, I want to screen you for that. And I hadn't made any mention of anything. So I'm like, okay. And so I did that screening, and it was like very strong indicator as well. So been to the doctors about that. And again, in the waiting list for diagnosis for ADHD as well. So that's kind of where I am. They're both self-diagnosis at the moment, but I'm in no doubt. I don't think anyone that knows me very well is in any doubt.
Yeah, and with private assessments being 4 figures, and the NHS waiting list being years, when you measure something in years, not weeks, then it's not desirable. I completely side with those people who have an affinity with a diagnosis, and sometimes that label helps them seek the right support or ask for help, etc., etc. So one of the hardest things that I've had to come to terms with is everybody banding the term disability around once you've got a diagnosis. Well, according to the NHS, I'm not disabled enough. So, well, you're not high priority, but I'll put you on the list. So, well, I'm not high priority because at the time I was in full-time employment, doing, earning above average salary. I was in a stable relationship. My life wasn't falling apart around me. It wasn't a bad place to be. Now I work for myself. My life's starting to fall apart around me. Well, so the problem with working for yourself and being neurodiverse is that when you're being told what to do, and you know that you're going to get paid anyway, you've got some routine and some structure to your day. You've got somebody who you're accountable to, and all of that. And talking to Lee in that previous episode, being responsible for paying yourself and paying the tax man, and making sure that you've done the client work when the client wants you to do the work, it's all a bit of a juggle. When
you do your own prioritization is that's something I struggle with too. And
so at the moment I'm landing on stuff that I'm enjoying doing rather than doing the stuff that I should be doing. But some of it makes me money and some of it's boring. So I'm going to do the stuff that I enjoy doing until the stuff that I need to do actually catches up with me. I don't think you mentioned it, but you alluded to it, that stuff's got better since April, and talking to occupational therapists. Is accommodations and reasonable adjustments something you want to talk about, or go on?
I'm happy to. So there was out of that conversation that I had with the occupational therapist, there were some recommendations, of course. We talked about what things impair me, what things distract me, and so on. And it's distractions are the big one, of course. And so certain things were put forward. So, for example, not these, but noise cancelling headphones for work, and certain software that would help me do text to speech as well, to help me understand what I was writing, or what I was reading as well, how it sounded, but particularly for what I was writing. So I was, it sounded like I wanted it to sound like. That makes sense. So yeah, those are in process as we speak. Yeah, the company's really good with that. And I know with other neurodiverse people within the business, they've helped with all sorts of other things as well. Things like buddies to help them understand what was the outcome of a requirement in a meeting or something like that. Yeah, that could help. That's not one that I currently felt the need for, but I know that they do all sorts of things. Yeah, consider whatever the therapist thinks is a reasonable adjustment, I guess.
And was there anything that you thought might have been better that the therapists didn't agree with, or that you've asked for on top of the therapist's recommendations?
No, actually the other way around. So the therapist came up with a lot more recommendations than I had envisaged, really. Yeah, so
okay, and then you've cherry picked the ones that you wanted.
Yeah, I think the ones that I think will have the biggest impact, and auditory disturbances, distractions are probably the one that's going to be the biggest one for me. So that's where the one I think will make the biggest difference.
Yeah, if I look out there, it's because somebody's cutting down a tree, and all I can hear is a chainsaw.
I can't hear it, so it's fine.
I've got the windows and doors shut, but I can still hear this in the background. So talk to me about how you ended up in Bentley, and how that may have been guided by your own choice or your neurodiversity.
Okay. So I guess it's a company that in the area is highly regarded as a good employer in general anyway. We're going back about a dozen years. I've done a series of jobs in various laboratories, because I'm a chemist, and a lot of those jobs, there was a space of perhaps 5 or 6 consecutive jobs, something like that, where I've stayed for plus or minus 2 years. And looking back, I think there's a lot of I got bored with. I needed something new, and opportunity at Bentley came up, so it was very appealing because of where it was and because of the type of role it was. And yeah, that's kind of where I ended up going for that. So I would say the neurodiverse aspect, the ADHD aspect, was that I was looking anyway, because I was coming to I'm bored now. I don't want, I'm not getting my neurotransmitters generated at work every day like I should be, and I need them. And that's kind of how I ended up moving on. And then I'm glad for where I've landed. That's worked out really well for me. And I've been here, I'm at home now, but I've been at Bentley for 12 years and not looking. So, things are always changing at Bentley, actually. So, that perhaps helps me.
Yeah, that impulsivity for novel experience is constantly there, because stuff changes and you engage with that.
Yeah, and it's a good balance, because obviously, the autism side is probably wants routine, it wants, to know exactly what's happening today and tomorrow and so on. And then the ADHD side wants something new. And then things aren't changing so much that the autism side of me is bothered, but they're changing enough to keep me interested. So yeah, it's worked really well.
Fantastic. So what drove you to set up the podcast? Is that some innate trait to want to share learning, or was that another impulse novel thing?
No, I suppose going back, I've done tuition for A-level and GCSE students chemistry students for, on and off for a couple of decades, really. And at first I did it because I thought I could and I'd quite like it, but then I found when I did it, it was really fulfilling. I really enjoy it. I got a lot from it. And I wanted to get something more from it. I suppose the other thing I would say is I really enjoy it. I'd come back buzzing, but I'd also come back drained because of that whole, it draws your energy, doesn't it, to be face to face, trying to explain something for an hour or so to someone. It does for me anyway. So it's like, how can I do this but not end up drained every time I'm doing it? So that's one of the reasons for the podcast, really, is to help students without having to be there with them, explaining it and draining myself at the same time. I can just record it, edit it at will, so I'm not talking garbage, because I can cut the garbage out, and then I'm helping those students wherever they are, and I'm getting the fulfillment out of it that way. And I have plans for where to take that as well. So to make it not just a podcast, but to create some video courses that that the students can access to, and potentially some other resources as well.
The Haggerty maths of science.
Some along those lines, yeah.
No, that's cool. Yeah. So when you started looking into, autism and latterly ADHD, is there any key moments in your existence in growing up that you can kind of link back to that diagnosis, so you've got an explanation for why you did or why you felt the way that you did when things happened?
Yeah, I think so. Gosh, and now I wasn't really expecting that question. I can't think of an exact one off the top of my head. But lots through, going back to, childhood as well as through my working life. There's the whole thing about working memory, isn't there? And, without me picking out particular times, because it happens so often, I just struggle to remember things. In the working memory, I can remember stuff that happened years ago. I can, sometimes I think I have almost photographic memory about places and so on. But in terms of, when I've got to work, if I had to think about it, it would be like, well, I can't even remember what route I came to work today. So, my working memory is dreadful. But and I suppose that doesn't really answer the question as such. But yeah, there is a lot of times where I'm sure I know I've forgotten things. I've forgotten to go to meetings. I've forgotten to do important things, and I just thought, oh, I'm forgetful, and I am. But now I know why I'm forgetful, and that actually I don't need to beat myself up about it. I don't need to go and read a book on how to improve my memory and concentration, because that ain't going to make the blindest bit of difference. And I suppose the other thing is, part of me is thinking about how other people react to that, and then it obviously wasn't important enough to you, Matthew. It obviously isn't on your priority list, Matthew. Well, yeah, there was nothing I wanted to do more than to go to that meeting, to put my input into whatever. It's just at that moment, my memory wasn't working. So
or there was a distraction.
Yeah, exactly.
There was a shiny thing that grabbed your attention more.
Yes, yes. It gave me the neurotransmitters that I needed at that moment, whereas the other thing, probably more important, but I need, my brain said, I need some neurotransmitters.
Yeah. Sitting there 20 minutes after you're meant to be somewhere else and thinking, I swear I should be somewhere else.
Yeah, exactly. I've done that. I've been sat in in an open office and wondering where the rest of my team are, and then I glanced over to the big meeting room, and they're all in there in the meeting that I should be in with them.
And it's so good of your colleagues not to have turned around and said, "Hey, Matthew, we're going into the meeting now. Are you joining us?"
I possibly wasn't at my desk at the time. I can't remember, but yeah. I mean, they didn't know. I didn't know that ADHD was a thing at the time for me.
So now you've looked into both of those. How do you feel about yourself? Are you happy that you've got something to pin this stuff to, or talk to me about?
I wouldn't describe it as I've got this thing that I can use as I can say, oh, that's my reason. That's because it's not my excuse. It's just the way I am. I feel tons better that I now understand that, where I've had where I've had a bit of a shutdown, or I've missed the meeting or whatever. Yeah, I'm disappointed, of course I am, but I don't have to kick myself about it. I understand it. I know it's me. I know it can't, I can't change it. It's just the way it is. It's the way it's happened, and I don't need to be kicking myself about it or making myself feel guilty, other than I missed giving some input to someone or whatever that might be. But it's not. I'm not a failed neurotypical anymore. I feel a lot happier about knowing myself and understanding those things, and and how they affect me.
So you used to feel
a lot happier.
Yeah. So you used to beat yourself up quite a bit about being forgetful and not being where you should be, and it's like other people can remember, other people prioritize this and that. It was important to me as well. Why didn't I? Yeah. So other than looking into it and getting a better idea of how your base state is, now you've got this label and framework to operate in. Is there any self-learning or guided support that you're undertaking to further develop that, or are you kind of at a plateau of saying, look, I've survived as many years as I have. I now have a really good understanding as to why I do what I do. That's me. I'm content. Or are you, doing more?
Okay, so yeah, I am doing more. I'm just doing different things to what I would have done. I'm not thinking, oh God, how can I train my memory better? I'm now thinking, what can I use to help me? So instead of relying on my memory, or trying to jot things down somewhere where I'll never come and look at it again, I'm now putting it into, say, a Google Calendar if it's a personal thing, or my Outlook calendar at work, so that I'm getting the reminders and scheduling a reminder to make me think about what's coming later in the day as well, so that actually when it comes to that, I have actually planned for it. I've thought about it. It's not just, oh heck, I've got that call with Richard at 11. I haven't thought about it. That's 5 minutes. No, so it's I'm changing how I'm coping with things. I'm carrying a little notebook around with me, and starting to actually get in the habit of occasionally using it, and sometimes even looking at it. So yeah, it's ongoing. That's going to be something that is, at least I know the things to try now, and the things, it's developing the right tools, isn't it, that will work for me, and the same for, I'm sure everyone who's in the same position will be looking for the tool that works for them, and it'll probably be something completely different than what works for me.
But and you're doing that all on your own, or have you got the support of a coach?
No, I don't have a coach. I mean, I have I alluded before to us having a neurodiversity group at work, and we do have regular contact with each other. We have a regular group meeting, and also talk to each other away from that. So there are things I've picked up.
More peer mentoring rather than.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's unofficial support, I guess, but it works brilliantly. It's made a world of difference to me. Yeah.
Are there any initiatives within work that group are striving for, or is it more of a representation and support group for colleagues rather than I think Lexic call them employee resource groups, groups of activists in the organization that are trying to push forward something?
Okay, so it's a bit of both, I suppose. So it is the peer support, and as part of that being a safe space for us to talk to each other about what's affecting us. What I hate the word impairments, but what those impairments are, and actually someone else will say, well, actually, I get a bit of that, and this helps me. But it's also although it's completely colleague led, it's also got very high up sponsors and patrons who are very helpful as well, making things happen and encouraging us to go to them with the things that we find are awkward, shall we say, for neurodiverse people. The difficulties we might face. And part of that is also, so you asked about, is it activism? It's not activism as such, but things that we've been involved with is when there are certain process reviews at work. As companies go through they have their processes, and they'll go through a regular review of those. We're now being included, not just the neurodiverse group, but all the whole health and well-being group, who are caring for people with all sorts of caring, who are supporting people with all sorts of medical situations. There's a mental health group. There are other groups as well. Off the top of my head, I'm struggling, but both men's and women's health topics are covered, and various other topics as well. And been included in reviews of processes, HR processes that are they're being reviewed, and it's like, does this actually cover the needs of you guys, and ask any questions or suggest anything? And that's been happening for a little while now. So that's really encouraging that our input is asked for and considered. I think what else? So and also there's a lot of input that we're feeding back about how the processes are actually working. So the processes, for example, for getting from the stage of these are the reasonable adjustments that we suggest for Matthew to the point where they're actually given to Matthew, there's obviously processes there. So there's going to be feedback on how well or not they work, not just for me, but for anyone within that group. So, and then that feedback has been asked for. So presumably, the company's only, the people are only asking for that so that they can make sure they're working properly, or make them better if they're not working smoothly.
So recalling working memory 101 today.
Yes.
At the beginning, you talked about going to see the occupational therapist following the autism day, and that gave you the confidence to talk to your line manager about it. How did that go?
Yeah, that went really well, actually. My manager was really, he knows people anyway who have neurodiverse conditions, and talking to him about it was very easy. He was very helpful, very supportive, remains very supportive. So I couldn't wish for that to have gone any better, really. I feel supported. I feel that when I speak to him, he's a patient guy anyway, but I probably am getting a little more extra patience maybe now if if I need to go and we have that thing, don't we? I'm not sure if it's ADHD or the autism, but it's that, I think it's probably both. When you want to go and speak to someone who's already in a conversation, it's that whole, how do I interrupt? How do I get in there? How do I join that conversation? Or and yeah, I've always found that very awkward, but that seems to be a lot easier now when I go to speak to him and a few other people I've mentioned my neurodiversities to. Yeah, so
the conversation, the conversation about disclosure, is that something that you've kept to a relatively small pool rather than being quite shouty about it?
Yeah, I have spoken to a few people individually about it. I'm sure a lot more people will have heard, through the grapevine. But it's not something that I felt I needed to go and sort of making a big announcement in front of groups of people about. Probably doesn't really affect people that much on the whole. We have the something else that our network organised was to have the company join the sunflower scheme. So I have the sunflower lanyard that I wear, but I'm not sure it's actually been noticed by anyone really. So it's there for prompting a conversation if anyone wanted to know, but yeah, it's never been an issue. It's not been an issue. And of course, this is all very recent stuff, so it's early days for me.
And I'm assuming that there was a consideration about the stigmatization of the labels.
Yeah.
Was that something that you were really unfazed by, or that you considered carefully, and that's why the pool is less wide?
Yeah, I would say partly. I've not told a huge number of people because of the stigma, because of the general stereotypes, I suppose, incorrect stereotypes of ADHD and autism conditions. People think it's certain things, don't they, and therefore stigmatize it. So yeah, I don't feel, and I'm not sure if ashamed is the word, I don't feel embarrassed about it, but it's not something I'd go telling people who are just sort of an acquaintance who happens to
you don't carry a
work
soapbox.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't feel I need to shout about it, but I'm happy to tell anyone who wants to know. I'd talk to anyone about it.
Oh, that's fantastic. We've talked about growing up and the challenges of working memory. We've talked about job hopping in science and ending up in Bentley and having nice amount of change and novelty at Bentley to keep you engaged for 12 years. We've talked about you having a good boss at Bentley, which means that you've had the opportunity to stay there long enough to see the novelty change. Rather than potentially a bad boss elsewhere or a less good boss elsewhere that was another nail in the coffin to prompt you to potentially move on. Then we've talked about your need for novelty and your benevolence, and setting up the podcast because of your desire in science and wanting to educate others.
My special interest, I guess.
It's an interesting conversation I had. Who was it with? I think it might have been Matt in his prep call. About the nuanced difference between special interest and hyperfocus. So, for me, a special interest is something that you keep going back to as having your attention drawn into something that you're so focused on it that you can't see anything or see other things. I see is subtly different. And the problem is that I've regressed. I'd landed on a couple of specialist subjects or things that I was really passionate about, Then I went on a psychological retreat to deal with childhood wounding 3 years ago. And now everything that I enjoyed as a kid is now on that list. So instead of me being able to go, you know, here's the 2 or 3 things that I have as a hobby, I can actually see development in my hobby because I've only got a couple of things to focus on.
Yeah.
I've now got 6, which means that I don't really ever see growth in my hobbies because I'm constantly bouncing around 6 things rather than 2. So yeah, going back to that whole conversation of, you know, projects that you start and never finish.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
I've part built 3 model railway layouts in the last 2 years. This room was my train room and is now a plasterboarded office.
Yeah.
I very nearly put a workbench over there to do other stuff in here. And I was like, well, no, I should really have this as like a sanctuary. Yeah, a dedicated place for the activity that I need to achieve. Because if I start doing other bits in here, then all of a sudden it blurs that line.
Yes.
And then yeah, I'm in another spiral of stuff. But even on this desk right now, I've got model making tools, bits of models, and this is meant to be my workspace.
Yeah.
But no, I was on a lovely call with Henry from ADHD Foundation and Leanne Maskell, the author of How to ADHD and an ADHD Coach. And it was like a group session of Ask the Coach. It was about an hour, maybe 90 minutes. And I was listening in on camera on a Zoom webinar, and just like model making whilst listening into everything that was going on.
Yeah.
So, you know, going through that process of the link between ADHD and addiction, I'm kind of addicted to being productive. I can't just sit there. Now, social media is quite good at going, you know, here's YouTube to watch.
Yes.
But I do that for about an hour, and then I'm just bored of sitting there not doing anything. So, you know, I eat Kit Kats and roll up the wrappers so I can dim or fidget, depending on which angle you want to look at that from. You know, I sit there and, you know, paint models. Well, because there's a level of mindfulness because you're concentrating on where you're putting the brush. Because if you don't, it takes 3 times as long. But then listening to stuff in the background. So, I was listening to all kinds of political stuff this morning because it's the end of the Tory party conference, and great. So I don't need to look at the screen to hear what they're talking about. So then I can focus on what's in my hands. But
I likewise, you know, I could be doing something for, you know, my blogging that goes with my podcast, and at the same time I'll be listening to a podcast on something completely different, or maybe some music. But and with the social media thing, I probably would get distracted. I've put an extension on Chrome that gets rid of my Facebook feed, so I can go on Facebook and not get distracted by the feed, and the same with Twitter, and the same with YouTube. So it's not suggesting all the next video to me. I'm like, yes, I'll just watch the thing I came here for and have my time back. Thank you.
Instead of chasing the white rabbit. 3 hours later being, how did I end up on why North Korea has something? I don't care.
And how did I come by it? Spinning plates on a stick kind of video. How did that work? You know, and you know, it's you end up down some strange things, can't you? And you know, whilst that might be an enjoyable spending of, you know, 2 or 3 hours or whatever, it is the spending of 2 or 3 hours doing something that actually hasn't necessarily been of much
it's probably
value.
rotted your brain rather than giving you anything.
So Chrome extensions.
I may or may not look into that.
So,
and at the same time, looking at Pomodoro, which is time-based strategy of focusing on stuff. So in that pause between sessions, it's quite nice just to scroll through something meaningless, because it gives you that sensory break.
You
a lot of people in tech call them creative breaks.
Yeah.
So actually, go for a walk for 10 minutes between your activities, because then you're getting some exercise and some fresh air. That's good.
Yeah.
You've got that physical delineation between tasks, which, since COVID and people working from home, we don't really get anymore. You don't have the half an hour commute where you're in the car. So at the beginning of the pandemic, one of my former colleagues used to drive around the block for 15 minutes and then walk into the house, into their office, because it helped them reprogram their mind into, I'm going to work. I'll drive around the block, walk in the front door, sit at my desk, turn my computer on. And then one of my other colleagues had been, a serial worker from home for a decade. And she was like, well, I've already got my morning routine. Me going to work is me opening that door behind me and sitting here. And, 10 hours later, getting up and walking out again. I was like, so you don't go to the toilet or drink or eat? And they're like, no, I'm too busy. I was like, you need to look after yourself. That whole conversation of, I've worked 60 hours a week. I can see you have.
Yes.
But you don't look like you've worked 60 hours a week. And somehow, Richard, you always make time for anything. And I was like, yeah, it's because I'm not working 60 hours a week. I'm not cutting corners. I'm being efficient with my time. It's all about that framing. So we're coming to the end of the slot that we have. Is there anything that you felt you might want to talk about but we haven't touched on?
I think I did touch on. I'd love, and this isn't just about where I'm working, but about society in general. I'd love for, maybe this month is the perfect month to help, but for us to explain better to the world what ADHD is, and the name of it is just so misleading, isn't it? I haven't got an attention deficit. I've too much attention. I'm giving it to other things all the time, and the hyperactivity thing, that's kind of makes you think about the stereotypical naughty boy bouncing off the walls, and it's not that at all for me. I was never that, but and of course there is the different types of ADHD, but that hyperactivity can be insight. It can be that my brain just doesn't switch off ever, kind of hyperactivity, rather than my body doesn't switch off. And so it's like how I think that's a really important thing on an ADHD awareness month to try and get out there, to try and change that stereotype.
I hear that, and I was listening to Neurodiversity and Me's podcast with Samantha Hugh, because she is the founder of ADHD Girls. And they are advocating for a change of term from ADHD to VAST. And VAST standing for Variable Attention Stimulus Trait, which means more about, we've got lots of attention and it's about how we focus. So it's more about executive function than it is a deficit or disorder.
Yes.
So we've already seen the change of language from syndromes to disorders to conditions, to try and neutralize that language, to say people are different, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I had an online debate. I don't know how heated it was. It felt pretty warm at times, about terminology for neurodiverse folk, because I see myself as neurodiverse, not neurodivergent, because to me divergent means that you've chosen to go a different way.
I see that.
It's almost like you're bad because you're not following the status quo. It feels wrong to be divergent.
Why haven't you been typical, Richard? That sort of it's that kind of
Well, yeah, there's a whole other conversation.
Well, yeah, but you know what I mean. That's kind of the impression it gives, isn't it?
So you know that there's a whole franchise of books and films about divergency. People breaking the mold, you know, challenging the status quo, you know, sticking it to the man. Sometimes you could see that as, you know, the hero complex. You know, you've chosen to adopt this identity because you're the hero of your own story, versus other people seeing you as, you know, that soapbox standing, flag waving, virtue signaling person, because you've chosen to be different. And, you know, I don't necessarily mean that I've chosen to be neurodiverse, but you're definitely not being neurotypical in talking about your neurodiversity. There's, you know, there are a lot more people who are far more reserved because of the stigma, because like, it's for me. Why should I care about what anyone else thinks? And a myriad of other things.
Exactly. And I agree entirely. And and from what you're saying, I'm picking up, this is, you know, it's not a divergence, it's not a rebellion against the typical, it's not I don't want to be like that, it's just that's the way we are. And I've
got oppositional defiance disorder to do the oppositional stuff. I don't need to be divergent because I've got oppositional defiance. So brilliant. So it's been lovely speaking to you, Matthew.
I've enjoyed it as well, Richard. Thank you.
Fantastic. And if anything changes, if you've got any new developments that you want to come and talk about, then let us know. But it's been fab having you on.
I'd enjoy that. And it's been great being on, Richard. Thank you very much.